Welcome back to the channel, guys, and welcome back to the GX. Yes, I know you're sick of seeing this bike now, but I bloody love it. But what I thought I'd better bring you, and you're sort of in time for the other video I've done, is actually a test ride on this machine, because I don't know whether you've seen it. You hopefully have seen it. I have fitted the full Lextek exhaust to my GX, and I've been up to Steve Jordan and we've mapped this machine. So in this video, this is the test ride from the mapping, so I'll let you know how it feels after it's been mapped. You know, I've ridden it back from Steve's, but it was dark, it was rush hour, and it was just on the motorway, so I haven't really had a chance. And I've poodled around here to sort of save the pops, bangs, and you know, my initial first impressions really. So I haven't even really opened this bike up myself yet to see the difference it's been made. Now, as we said in the video, you know, a lot of the changes to this bike are obviously emissions driven, because you know, Suzuki have to meet Euro 5 plus emissions with their machines now. So you know, a lot of this stuff that you do with mapping for modern bikes is really about sort of taking off those built-in restrictions which the manufacturers have had to implement to get them through emission control. So if you take that stuff off, you can unlock a lot of nice rideability features of the machine. It's not all about top end. So we'll talk through a bit of that. Some of the questions from the mapping video as well, because there's a lot of questions in the comments from people not quite understanding some things and the power figures and stuff. So I'll try and cover that as well. But if you want to see what the GX and hear what the GX sounds like now it's got the full system and the remap, then stick around, get yourself a cup of tea, and Chopsy, roll the intro. So before we jump on and start riding, obviously when I've only got my helmet camera today, so I can't get any sort of exhaust noise. So the only exhaust you're going to hear is through the helmet, through the camera. So I think what we'll do before we set off, I'll start it in here with this camera so you can get a better idea of what it actually sounds like. So let me turn her on. Oh, there's my bald slaphead. So let's fire her up. So as you can hear, just on idle, it's actually pretty reasonable. Now the Lextek N-Can does come with a baffle, so you can have a baffle in this. I haven't got a baffle in it. If you did a track day, I'd probably put the baffle in it. But the sound isn't too bad at idle. It is a bit louder. And when you rev it, it does sound a bit louder, but it's not obnoxious. I didn't want it to be obnoxious. I didn't want a bike where I'd had to wear earplugs to even ride it. So it's at that level where it's just about acceptable for me, without earplugs, without annoying everyone. I don't want to be one of those people annoying everybody with their loud exhaust. So it's loud, but the perfect amount of loudness. And I think that little collector box at the bottom of the system there brings the noise level down to a really nice amount. And of course, this is a touring bike. This bike spends a lot of time sat on the motorway. You don't want a horrible droning exhaust on a bike you're going to do a lot of motorway miles. So yeah, the sound of it, I'm really happy with the volume. So let's give it another little rev. Hang on. Lovely. I've got a really bad back at the moment. I've been laid up for 2 weeks now with a bad back. It's just about acceptable now, my back, but if I'm grunting and groaning, it's because my lower back. Bloody nothing worse. If you've had a bad back, lower back pain, sort of sciatica, it's awful. You can't even do anything, you know. You can't even sit and watch the telly without pain. But anyway, I'm not moaning about my bad back. This is all about the GX. I'm gonna have to suck it up. So I will be doing like a first year straight away. Oh, rumble and popping. So straight away I'm loving it, because you get a lot more theatre. So I've had this GX I think since March. or was it April time? I can't remember, March or April time. I've done 3,000 miles on it now, or just 2,974, so almost. By the time I finish this ride, it'll be 3,000 miles. I've absolutely loved this bike. I was lucky enough to also go on the launch of this machine in Portugal. You know, one of the criticisms of this bike is the standard tyres, and if you heard all this before, I'm sorry, but the standard tyres on this bike, I love that crackling, aren't great, you know. So one of the first mods I've done to this is put decent rubber on it, and because I was trying to make this bike, you know, a do-it-all bike, a bike that you can do anything on. I'm not talking about going off-road, obviously I'm not talking about going off-road, but I'm talking about a bike that can cover distance on. You could perhaps do a track day on and have fun, not be the fastest obviously, you want to go on the fast group with a load of proper track bikes on slicks, but you could go into the Inters group, terrorise a few people and have a bit of fun on. You know, and also take it out as your scratcher, so not only track days, but if you just fancy a bit of a sporty ride, come out on it and do that sort of riding as well, you know. And I'm going to say that this bike ticks all those boxes. Certainly now I've changed the rubber, and I've added, actually I've got a 200 section rear tyre on this bike at the moment. A Dunlop Sport Smart 3 255, because that jacks the bike up. And that was one thing sort of the bike was, I think, missing a little bit. It needed a little bit more weight on the nose, and that 200 profile tyre, 250 profile tyre, whoa, that does the job. It puts the bike on its nose a little bit more, gives you a bit more feedback through the front wheel, and also with the tyre change, like I say, it's transformed it, having a bit of feel and feedback through the tarmac, through the tyres. That's a big boy, which was absolutely missing, you know, with the standard setup. So that's sort of my goals with this bike, to make it into something, a do-it-all bike that can do everything, apart from obviously off-roading. I'm not talking about off-roading. I don't believe there's a bike out there that can literally do everything. And oh, the GS chopsy, yeah, I know, but it's not quick at a track day, is it? You may, you know, you may go round, but not proper. So these bikes are 150 horsepower at the crank standard. That's what Suzuki say. Based on what I got out of the bike, you know, that's probably a little bit conservative. It could be more like 155, something like that, because this bike made 145 horsepower with just the exhaust swap, and this is rear tyre numbers, okay? So a lot of people got confused. I think it was 155.4 peak power at full throttle. A lot of people said, well, they make 152 standard, so you've not really got much. That's at the back tyre. The manufacturers always quote power figures at the crank. So, and you obviously lose power through the transmission, through the chain, you know, through the back wheel. That all saps power. So this made 155 at the back wheel. Now, I think Steve said you have to times it by 0.9 to find out what the loss is through the transmission, but it's normally around about sort of 15 horsepower, 15%, something like that. So the bike is probably about 170, between 170 and 175 actually at the crank now. So this measured at the same place that the manufacturers measure the power. So this is now putting out all the ponies. But one thing with the mapping, it's not just about riding at full throttle. You know, as Steve said in the mapping video, I'll link it to the top by the way if you haven't seen it. You know, peak power is one thing, but who rides a bike on the road at full throttle all the time? Nobody does. Certainly not. You might do if you've got a 50cc or a 125, but no one rides, you know, a proper bike 100% throttle all the time. So what you can achieve by mapping it really is not just those peak power. Obviously that's improved, and I've picked up another 15 horsepower or so at the top end, but it's about the mid-range, the part throttle. And new bikes are all ride-by-wire these days, and as I said at the beginning, you know, they're all set up to meet the Euro emission standards, noise emission standards. So to meet those standards, the manufacturers have to implement some sort of workarounds, really. You know, of course, they mustn't, you know, put out a certain amount of particulates, you know, so they have catalytic converters on, of course. And if you've got a cat, you know, to get the emissions down, the cats have got to be heated up quite quickly. They've got to get really hot cats. So what they tend to do is make bikes very, very lean, so everything gets hot. So you're not putting much fuel in to actually cool the explosion, if you like, and everything's very hot. And then the cats like that. They do better. They filter the fumes better and remove more particulates if the exhaust gas is really hot. And they do that by ignition, you know, and basically fuel, and making the fuel mixture very lean. And to do that, they use a lambda sensor in the exhaust, you know, which you would have seen on this bike. This bike only has one. Some bikes now have 2 or even 3 lambda sensors on. But the lambda sensor on this bike is what they call the narrow band. This is more technical than I wanted it to be. It's called a narrow band sensor. So that only really monitors the fueling up until sort of a third way up the rev range, let's say. Once you get past a third way up the rev range, then you're switched onto the actual fuel map. The fuel map table, which tells the bike how much fuel to put in at a certain throttle position and a certain speed, all sorts of certain gear. These throttle maps go across all gears, you know, all throttle positions, to tell the bike how much fuel to put in. So if you disable the lambda sensor, you can actually make the bike use the throttle map and not the lambda map, because the lambda map wants to keep the bike very, very lean, and having a lean bike affects your throttle response. So it makes it snatchy, basically. And obviously when ride-by-wire systems came out, when Euro 4, look at the drive from lower down. Oh, pop. Woo. Oh, this is all getting way too technical, isn't it? This is all getting... We don't care about all this chop C. We just want to know how fast it is and what it sounds like. Yeah, I get it. I get it. What I was getting to is, you know, to achieve these emissions, basically the rideability of the bike suffers. So to make it and meet these emission controls, the rideability, the throttle response, the power pickup, the noise of the bike, you know, it all suffers to meet these regulations. So basically, by having your bike mapped, even if you've changed nothing, you know, you've not even put a pipe on it, nothing, you can still make your bike ride nicer by getting rid of the lambda, so getting rid of the really lean bottom end and having the fueling adjusted. Because another trick which manufacturers use to this road's actually looking pretty shitty, isn't it? Another trick which manufacturers use to meet an emission standard is to have control to play around with the throttle bodies. You know, how far open the actual throttle moves, if you like, the throttle blades move. So if you're looking for 100, so if you turn your twist grip and you're looking for 100% throttle, the bike may decide, well, hang on, you're not having 100% throttle at this revs, you're only going to have 50% throttle. So having it mapped enables Steve or the tuner to actually get the throttle blades opening a decent amount, not one-to-one, because as Steve said in the video, that can make the bike too snatchy, too aggressive. But if you're at 10% throttle, rather than the bike giving you 3% on the throttle blades, it's now giving you 6%. And that's the sort of changes that a tuner can make to your bike lower down to make it feel more urgent, really. There's like a rumble. In the mid-range, I don't know if you saw it there, and I've got the traction control on level 3, so the traction is quite high, but it's pulling the wheel up in the mid-range much more than it did before, much more so. It was a lot less keen to lift the wheel before, so that's great. I mean, it's made it more urgent, it's made it more fun. Ooh, yeah, we're not flying around here today. What this bike reminds me of now is my K8 GSX-R, which I've sold. It really sounds like my K8. Pops, the bangs. It feels like a sports bike, but with panniers. and a comfortable riding position. I've currently got it in the B mode, so I'm just going to flip it into the A mode, which is the more aggressive map. I've also turned the traction control off in A. I do not want the traction control off in these. I'm going to put the traction control on 2 because it is a bit mucky, and the suspension is on super hard in this setting. So the suspension is now super firm. Oh, I love the pop on the upshift. It didn't do that before. It's got a lovely little pop as you go up on the blipper, and when you back off the throttle it pops and bangs as well. There's a big backfire. Let's give it a little bit of handling first. Got to be a little bit careful. Oh! Traction control's flashing like a mad thing then. Got to be a bit careful. The conditions are pretty it's 8 degrees. Oh, I haven't got my heated grips on, talking about 8 degrees, just have some of that. And yeah, I'm going to have to be a little bit careful. Previously, the A mode was a little bit snatchy. Not too bad, but had a little bit of a snatchiness to it. So I sort of rode it in B mode most of the time because that was nice. That gave good response. It wasn't snatchy. Now, the A mode is definitely not as snatchy. It's still right there when you turn the throttle, but it hasn't got that sort of slightly snatchy feel to it that it did before, so that's great. I've now got 3 power modes. I can actually use all of them, but it's just that initial, the biggest sort of change is, you know, 5th gear, you just touch the throttle, it just drives forward. Much more urgency there than there was previously. Oh, I can't see shit. It's actually drizzling, so that is really not what I wanted. I didn't want to be out in the rain. Bloody glasses are steaming up. Or they're just getting wet. I think it's actually raining is the problem. I went to Motorcycle Live this year, so if you saw it at Motorcycle Live, thanks to everyone that came over and said hello, by the way. really appreciated. But I was collared by people selling anti-fogging stuff for your glasses. I don't know if anyone else fell for this or fell for it. It's okay, but at the show there was this here it is. This is one thing that's great, isn't it? That panniers, bloody panniers. So one thing I got collared with at the show was this here, which is a lens cloth for your glasses, anti-steam lens cloth, and they gave it all the big spiel. You know, it works on some fancy as you actually rub the glasses, it creates some sort of static on it and it stops it steaming, and it does work. It does absolutely work, but it says on here it lasts anti-fog for 24 hours. Call that an hour tops. It works for about an hour and then it starts to fade, which is great. I mean, you get a good hour of glasses which won't fog up, but after the hour it starts to wear off. So apparently as you rub it with this special cloth which is infused with special things and give it a rub like that, that actually creates like some sort of statically, the polymers at an atomic level. The guy was giving me all this, do something, so you've got to give it a good 30 seconds of rubbing like this, and it builds up this staticky polymer that stops fog and water. I don't know, it works, as I say, for about an hour, then it wears off, but it will do for the remainder of this video, hopefully. 15 quid that was. I'll give you 15 pence. There's one thing with the mapping which I'm not 100% sure on. It's something I noticed when I was riding at home. It's something I noticed a bit more when you're in traffic rather than, you know, you've got an open road. And one of the adjustments we made was, it's quite a common one, I try not to get too technical again and get lost in some long spiel, but you know, as you close the throttle, another trick which manufacturers have done to sort of meet emission stuff is when you close the throttle, the injectors stop pumping fuel into the bike.
no fuel. And you'd say, well, that's fine. But if you remember an old bike, pre-ride-by-wire, you know, you'd always have a bit of fuel going through the engine when you close the throttle, you know, like your idle fuel. There's still be some fuel going through. But for emissions, they stop that. And what that means is another reason it's a little bit snatchy, because you're going from no fuel to sort of minimal fuel. There's a step where the fuel starts. So when you have it mapped, one of the options you can have is to have a little bit of fuel trickle through when the throttle's closed, and it makes that transition on and off a bit better. But what I've noticed is in traffic it can push up. Normally when you close the throttle, you've got the engine braking to slow you down, but if you're pumping a little bit of fuel in, it affects the engine braking. And this is how they have adjustable engine braking on bikes, because if you don't like much engine braking, they push more fuel in as you close the throttle, and that's how you get adjustable engine braking. You've got sort of your basic mechanical engine braking is when you close the throttle, there's no fuel going in, that is your engine braking. That's your maximum engine braking, that's your mechanical engine braking. To make it less engine braking, they can put a little bit of fuel in to push the bike push it on a little bit. And that's how they do it with on some bikes which have adjustable engine braking. This one doesn't. But I have noticed since we turned that on, there is now less engine braking. At higher speeds it's fine, but at lower speeds you close the throttle, it's almost like the throttle's stuck and it's pushing on a little bit and the bike's not slowing down, and you have to brake a bit more, using more of the brakes. I quite like bikes with quite a lot of engine braking, so that's something can be easily turned off, but I've got to go back. Only Steve can do that because it's got to be done through the software, so I may look at that. That could also affect how many pops and bangs we've got as well, so it's another reason to leave it on, because I like the pops and bangs. So I'll see how I get on with that and decide if it's worth actually turning on or off, but let's try and live with it for a little while first. Anyway, let's jump back on now. I've defogged my glasses, hopefully, we'll see, for an hour anyway, maybe 20 minutes. It's wet on the inside of my visor now, so I've completely bollocks that, haven't I? Right, let's get home before it gets any worse. I don't want to get wet. Oh, I love that crackle. I don't know if you can hear that. Oh, quite a big pop there. I don't know if that's going to become tiresome. I don't think so. I don't think it's loud enough to become tiresome. Oh, it's quite slippery there. I'd say it's made the bike a little bit more like the XR, from that sort of the urgency, the way it accelerates, how urgent it is at the bottom end. That was like this. This now feels more urgent. Could it be a bit more urgent still? Yeah, maybe it could actually. Maybe a slight little gearing tweak might help it, you know, just make the front sprocket bigger or smaller, whatever it is. That may help it punch out corners even more, because it cruises really nicely anyway. Of course, with the 255 tyre, the gearing has also changed. So I don't know whether 255 is the best tyre. I just had one, which I had for my H2 years ago, and I thought I'd try it to go, you know, go to maximum. Well, the M1000 XR has a 200 rear, so I thought, well, let's give it a try on the 200, and it hasn't really slowed down the steering at all. It still turns in really nice, but it will have changed the gearing a little bit. You know, the back wheel will be bigger, so it will have changed the gearing. It doesn't affect the speedo, because the speedo is fed from the front wheel, but it will affect the gearing. So maybe a slight tweak on sprockets could correct that, or maybe push it the other way a little bit so it's got even more pickup, and that could be then absolutely perfect. So there we are. I will be bringing you a sort of the summary of this bike and what I think to it after I've had it for sort of 6 months. I've had it 6 months or so now, I think, maybe a little bit longer. It's meant to go back 10th of January. I've spoken to Suzuki, they've extended that now until May, or was it March? May or March time. It would be a shame to hand it back now all the mapping work is done. I need to enjoy this bike a bit more. I may even buy this bike. I'm thinking I'm probably going to buy it now. Now I've had all this work done, you know, had all this stuff done to it, probably going to buy it. Oh, heated grips. Heated grips don't stay on once you turn the bike on and off. That's a little bit annoying. Keep forgetting to put them back on again. There we are. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope I've managed to explain things well enough. It's quite difficult. Obviously it's very technical when you're talking about mapping bikes, and I hope I haven't droned on a bit too much about the technical stuff or my interpretation of the technical stuff. No, I'm not an engine tuner, but I've had a few bikes done, so I sort of know the process a bit now. But yeah, incredibly happy with what Steve's done, so massive thanks to Steve Jordan and his mapping expertise. It's absolutely lovely. So just that pushing on in the lower throttle things, I might just get him to look at. But yeah, very happy indeed. So I will be back with more content from the GX. We're going to do some comparisons. It's almost a little bit unfair now to compare this against other bikes. Now this is all souped up, as it were, but we'll obviously take that into account. So thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you on the next one. Thanks so much. Gonna go and warm up now. We're already freezing.